Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Apple for the Teacher podcast. My name is Anna Thomas and it's great to have your company. I currently work in a primary school as well as putting this podcast together. I was hearing more and more news stories about teachers behaving badly, and as a teacher myself, I thought there may be enough good stories and content for a podcast, and this has proved true. I have been thoroughly enjoying researching this podcast, and I have found such intriguing stories, which I am looking forward to bringing you. What I have found is far beyond what I expected about the school system. Although I could have focused on the stories I call the bad apples, I thought it would be appropriate to show a balance, as not all of us are bad apples. So you will hear good apple stories, which will be positive and uplifting as well. If you are a teacher or work in a school, don't hesitate to contact me to share your story. I would love to make your stories a part of this podcast. Just email me at applefortheteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Every episode will tell a bad apple story and a good apple story. My policy is not to provide the names of people who commit murder or other crimes, but rather to focus on telling the stories of the victims. The names of the so-called bad apples will not be revealed, as I believe they should not be given any more airtime. When I listen to true crime podcasts, sometimes I'm interested to find out more about the story online, whether it be for photos or videos. Although on my podcast, names will not be given, there is still enough information if you really want to find out more. So, let's get into the bad apple story. I had a number of episodes already planned, but then I came across this story and I just had to bring it up the queue. As a little teaser, I'm just going to give you a little clue. Lightning strikes twice. This first story is called Your Money or Your Life and is made up of 2 parts. So let's get started with part 1. The year was 1972 in Australia. There was a small one-teacher school situated in a rural location in a town called Faraday in the state of Victoria. At 3 p.m, 2 men entered the school armed with shotguns. They forced its 20-year-old female teacher, Mary Gibbs, and 6 of her students into a red delivery van. They left a note at the school threatening to kill all of the hostages unless a ransom of $1 million was paid in cash. They drove away with the victims into a remote area in the bush. The note read as follows: ransom will be $1 million, $500,000 in $20 notes in 3 suitcases, the other $500,000 in $10 notes in 6 suitcases. All currency must have been in circulation at least 12 months. Pickup details. At 7:25 p.m, we will contact Lindsay Thompson at Russell Street Police Headquarters and make arrangements with him. We are not going to waste anyone's time by making idle threats. So, we will cut it short by saying that any attempt to trace us and apprehend us will result in the annihilation of every hostage. The government agreed to pay the ransom. Lindsay Thompson was the Victorian Education Minister. He was driven to the scene by the Assistant Police Commissioner, who masqueraded as the minister's driver while armed with a pistol. Another policeman hid under a blanket in the rear of the vehicle with a high-powered rifle. Thompson waited to deliver the ransom personally. However, the money was never collected. The next morning, the two abductors told the teacher that they intended to collect the payment. After they left, Mary managed to kick the door panel out with her platform-heeled leather boots, thus giving her and her pupils their chance to escape. Despite their escape taking place in the dark and struggling to find their way around, the freed group managed to find help a few kilometres away. Following an extensive search, the two men were later captured by heavily armed Victoria police officers. One of the men pleaded guilty to 7 counts of kidnapping and was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 10 years. 3 armed robbery charges against him also got taken into consideration in exchange for evidence against his accomplice. As for the accomplice, he was convicted by a jury and given a sentence of 17 years imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 12 years. For her bravery, the teacher, Mary Gibbs, was awarded a George Medal on January the 22nd, 1973. Now, that's not to the end of the story. As I said at the start, lightning strikes twice. Now we will go on to part 2, which is just unreal. As I was researching it, I felt like I was reading a Hollywood script, so be prepared for some craziness. We are now going to a town called Warreen, which is 3 kilometres away from where the Faraday kidnapping occurred. The year is 1977, 5 years after the Faraday kidnapping. Rob Hunter had his first teaching job after 3 years at college in a sole teacher school. He was 20 years of age. He had been welcomed into the township with a local barbecue a few days earlier. He had 9 children in his school, 6 girls and 3 boys, ranging in age from 7 to 11 years old. 9 days into his job, during recess time, some kids ran into his classroom shouting, "There's a man outside with a gun." As the school was in a rural location, his initial reaction was that it's just a harmless hunter out shooting rabbits. And then he saw him, the man in the balaclava, pointing the handgun straight at him, saying, "Don't try anything effing smart or I'll shoot you." The man was a jail escapee. The teacher didn't know it at the time, but he was the same man who 5 years earlier committed exactly the same crime, 270 kilometres away, kidnapping Mary Gibbs and her 6 students at Faraday. He and another inmate escaped from the Geelong jail in December 1976. The men tunnelled through 2 double-skinned brick walls, cut through a paddock to an outside exercise yard and scaled the external wall and were able to steal a car to make their getaway. The men then parted ways. Rob hoped it was just a robbery and offered to write a cheque, but the gunman replied, "No, mate, that's not the sort of money I want." He chained the children together and bound and gagged Rob before putting them into his stolen vehicle. Before they left, he had written a message on a torn piece of cardboard that read, "Have gone on a nature study trip. We'll be back in 1 hour," and commanded the teacher to sign it. He also had a ransom note which stated the following. He demanded the release of 17 of the state's most dangerous criminals an arsenal of weapons, $7 million in US currency, 100 kilos of cocaine, 100 kilos of heroin, and a late model car with a full tank of petrol. The note was addressed to the Deputy Premier of Victoria, Lindsay, the same man who was sent the ransom note during the first Faraday kidnapping. What the teacher didn't know was that he had tried the kidnapping at another school earlier, before then randomly choosing Rob's class. The ransom note had the name of the original school called Allenby, which was crossed out and replaced with Warreen. After taking off in the van with the hostages, he stopped at some point to post the ransom letter. During the drive, he yelled at the children, all crammed in the back cabin, "You kids keep down. When we're passing any cars, keep your heads right down or bullets will be flying." During the ordeal, one of the girls asked, "What's your name?" And the gunman eventually responded, "Ted," failing even to attempt to provide an alias. Another girl said, "Ted, what are you going to do with us? Where are you going to take us? How long are we going to be away for? When will we get back?" He answered, "You'll only be away until I get what I want. Don't worry, just do what I say and I won't hurt you. But if you do anything silly, I'll shoot the teacher." He drove erratically, hurtling along gravel roads and throwing the chained children around the floor of the truck, leaving them frightened and one bleeding. He yelled, "Keep your heads down or watch out. If I see you waving to anyone, I'll shoot someone." Then he ran into another truck, jumped from his vehicle, and took the two men in the truck hostage. "Don't try anything effing smart, or I'll blow your heads off." He now had 12 hostages. Then another truck appeared, and he grabbed the two men on board, bringing the number to 14. When a combi van pulled up with two women on board, he added them to the list, now 16 people. He jammed all these people in the van and drove them to his campsite for the night. He openly bragged about the Faraday kidnapping and declared that this time, if confronted by police, he would shoot it out with them. He wouldn't be going down alone. He would shoot some of them too. A radio was on, and the news of the kidnapping broke on the radio, with the gunman showing his delight. During the night, one of the truck drivers managed to remove his chains and crept out of the campsite. He then jogged more than 10 kilometres to a farmhouse to raise the alarm. By early the next morning, the gunman realised one of the prisoners had escaped. He took off with the remaining 15 hostages. The police eventually were on his tail. He shot at the police cars, who fired at the tyres. He was shot in the leg and finally arrested. The whole ordeal had lasted 21 hours. They experienced a car crash, a night imprisoned, an escape, police pursuit, a shootout, and a wounding before final rescue. The gunman pleaded guilty in the Supreme Court to 16 counts of kidnapping, 3 of theft of vehicles, 3 of using a firearm to avoid arrest, 1 of escape, 1 of burglary, and 1 of theft. He was sentenced to 21 years with a minimum of 18 years. However, it will not be the last people would hear about him. In 1981, he strangled and killed another prisoner in Pentridge Prison. In 1993, he was released. It has been reported that he now works as a truck driver and has not been in any legal trouble since. After the ordeal, 4 of the students did not return to the school, leaving Rob with just 5 students for the rest of the year. He went on to write a book about the ordeal some 40 years after the event, called Day 9 at Warreen. At the book launch last year in 2018, 6 out of the 9 students attended. You can find a photo on the Facebook page. He refused to be defined by the kidnapping and continued to teach around Victoria. He said he had to let go of his anger and not seek revenge. He now gives school lectures on the lessons he has learnt and teaches kids about mental resilience. His seminar is called Health After Hurt and gives a first-hand insight into the trauma experienced by the victims of heroism and bravery, along with the health and healing that is possible from such pain and torment. Students are given practical tools to cope with their hurts and traumas. And here's a remarkable fact about the story. One of the students, who was 9 years old at the time, went on to become mayor of the local government where the kidnapping took place. He says the ordeal has shaped the person that he became later on in life, in a good sense, of course. So, what do you think about that story? Absolutely crazy. It was probably a good thing that he was such a stupid criminal, otherwise it may have been a totally different outcome. What got me was that he posted the ransom note, but I guess that was the only choice back in the 1970s with no computers. So he must have realised it would take some time to be delivered, considering it was back in 1977. So obviously that would mean keeping the hostages for an unknown amount of time. Had he directed them to deliver the money to the campsite where he had the hostages or at some other location? But then he would have to leave the hostages alone to collect it. I really wonder how much he had thought this whole thing through. I have a feeling not very much. The whole story is just so laughable if it wasn't so serious. As always, I have not named the gunman and will continue to not name the bad apples in future episodes, as I don't believe that these people deserve any recognition. Before I finish this story, I came across another interesting piece of information about the gunman. He wrote a book about the incident. Can you believe it? I really think there should be a law about criminals profiting from their crimes. Like, I know this occurs in some places where they don't allow people to profit from their crimes, but I think it just should be a blanket rule for anyone committing crimes that they're not allowed to profit from their crimes. Personally, I have no interest in reading any criminal's memoirs, but I would gladly read a victim's account instead. I will put details of Rob's book on the Facebook page, as well as details of his seminars. There are also some great black and white photos of the students and Rob himself, and also of Mary and her students involved in the first kidnapping at Faraday. So if you'd like to have a look at these, just go to the Apple for the Teacher podcast Facebook page. I also have an Instagram page where I put lots of photos as well, so you can have a look at there as well. Now let's go on to story 2, which is the Good Apple story. It's called The Lawsuit. In 2007, a student named Lindsay attended a high school in the US. She received a bad grade in biology and decided to sue her teacher and the Board of Education, demanding that the grade be changed. She was given an F on a leaf project because it was turned in late. She explained that she had gone on a student council trip, which caused her to turn the project in late. She claimed to be shocked and embarrassed at the grade and that it could be a potential life ruiner. The student claimed the grade would prevent her from becoming the school valedictorian, or at least that the incident had destroyed her goal of graduating with the highest honours. She was previously sporting a 4.5 GPA and claimed that it would drop to 4.45. She was offered half credit after her parents and the principal intervened, but this was not sufficient. The student felt that the teacher's action was intended to punish and ruin her GPA. She demanded compensation for emotional distress, loss of enjoyment of life, and of scholarship potential. During the court proceedings, she argued, quote, "I was on an improved field trip that day, and not even in the stupid school to turn in the stupid leaf project, which was stupid anyway." The judge remarked that she had other options, namely to turn the project in a day early, or she could have called her mother to turn it in for her, or taken other steps to deal with the issue. The judge also wrote that she was not punished for her absence. Instead, she did not receive full credit because she did not turn the project in on time. The case was dismissed with the judge stating, quote, "The lawsuit appears to invite the judiciary to second-guess grading decisions of professional educators, who are traditionally vested with great discretion in that area. It is not a proper role for a court to assess whether a particular penalty imposed for turning in schoolwork late is too harsh." He continued saying, "A grade cannot be altered once given unless it can be shown that a teacher made a mathematical error in calculating it." The teacher involved in the incident said, quote, "I am thankful for the judge's decision to dismiss this case, not just on my behalf, but on the behalf of all teachers. Every teacher I know tries to ensure success for each student as much as possible. We cannot be effective in the classroom while harbouring paranoia about parents second-guessing grades or every mark that we make on a paper." Well, that was an interesting story. My thoughts on this are, if she was someone who had a 4.5 GPA and scholarship potential, then she should have been smart enough to turn in her leave project on time. Or she could have spoken to the teacher and said, "Look, I'm going to be out of town, so could I hand it in the next day?" And the teacher either would have said yes or no. I think that she just needs to learn a bit of self-respect. And self-respect comes from saying, you know what? This may not be fair, but I have to accept the consequence. Part of going to school is learning that there are rules, learning that there are deadlines. She needed to learn from her mistake and just suck it up. As for her parents, well, if this happened to me, my parents would have said, "Tough, it was your own fault." They wouldn't have encouraged me to sue the teacher. From time to time, parents do question grades given, and as long as you can clearly justify the grade, it can usually be resolved with the parent. In some cases, I have showed that students were absent on key days, which may have affected their result. Other times, the student failed to give the parent the correct information, such as how long they had to complete the task. Once this is pointed out, the parent can see that their child failed to manage their time. Assessment is such a complicated task, and I have been successfully able to explain to parents what goes into assigning a grade, and many of them have expressed they had no idea how intricate the process was, and they came out having a much better appreciation of what teachers do. I'm so pleased about the outcome of this case, and thankfully common sense prevailed. Otherwise, the floodgates would have opened up. It was such a waste of precious court time on something so frivolous. The courts are there to deal with serious crimes, not such pettiness. I really cannot see how the law system can assess the grades given by teachers, and the judge obviously agreed. But it does leave me thinking whether such a case has ever been successful, and this is something that I'm going to pursue. Leaving out the possibility of a mathematical error, I'm intrigued if a teacher has actually been successfully sued for grades given. So stay tuned on that one. I might be able to find a story for a future episode. If you're a teacher, I would really like to hear if you've experienced parents complaining or questioning your grading and what the outcome was. You can post your story on the Apple for the Teacher Facebook page or the Facebook group, or email me at applefortheteacherpodcast@gmail.com. I'd now like to give you a preview of the next episode, episode 5. It's called Gay Bunny and the T-shirt. Here's a summary. A teacher reads a storybook about a bunny. There's no harm in that, right? Taylor wore a T-shirt to school that caused a stir. So, what was all the fuss about? Thank you so much for staying with me till the end. I'm loving researching and putting this podcast together. I've been a podcast listener for a while, and I thought I'd give it a go. Let me know if you have any feedback or ways that I could make it better. I'm always open to suggestions. So, to end this episode, I will leave you with this quote. Students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Bye for now, and remember to be a good apple.